Have you ever dreamed of exploring Bulgaria, a country where soaring mountains, golden beaches, and ancient towns meet deep forests and river valleys? Many travelers know Sofia, Plovdiv, and the Black Sea coast, but few realize Bulgaria also hides the highest peak in the Balkans at nearly 3,000 meters, rock-hewn sanctuaries built by the Thracians, and medieval fortresses that once guarded empires. The good news is you don't have to piece it all together alone. Today, we'll take you through Bulgaria's most fascinating places, from ancient cities to untamed landscapes. Spreading across southern Bulgaria, the Rhodope Mountains form a landscape of rolling ridges, deep valleys, and endless forests. Unlike the jagged peaks of Stara Planina, the Rhodopes are softer, their slopes covered with pine, beech, and oak that stretch to the horizon. Rivers carve gorges through the rock, cutting narrow passages where cliffs rise high above the water. The mountains are tied to legend. Ancient Thracians worshipped here, and myths place Orpheus among the valleys of the Rhodopes. Caves like Yagodina and the Devil's Throat descend deep underground, their chambers echoing with water and darkness. On the surface, meadows open among the forests, dotted with villages where houses cluster around wooden balconies and red-tiled roofs. The scale of the region holds countless wonders. Stone bridges arch over mountain rivers, plateaus like Belintash rise bare above the trees, and fortresses cling to cliffs overlooking valleys. High in the Srednogora Mountains lies Koprivshtitsa, a town of cobbled lanes and brightly painted houses. The streets wind along the valley floor, crossing stone bridges over a river that runs through the center. The houses are the heart of the town. Built in the 19th century during Bulgaria's national revival, they rise in bold colors of blue, red, and ochre. Their walls lean over the streets with wooden balconies, carved eaves, and heavy doors that open into shady courtyards. Inside, painted ceilings and carved furniture recall the life of merchants and revolutionaries who once gathered here. In northwestern Bulgaria rise the Belogradchik Rocks, a landscape of cliffs and pillars carved by time into strange and towering forms. Spread across 30 kilometers, the sandstone and limestone formations rise in red and gray, their shapes sculpted by wind and rain into walls, towers, and figures that seem alive in the shifting light. Legends surround the rocks. Some are named for the shapes they resemble: a monk, a horseman, a schoolgirl, while others are tied to stories of betrayal, love, and battles. Between them, valleys open suddenly into meadows, framed on all sides by vertical stone. At the edge of the cliffs stands Belogradchik Fortress, built into the rocks themselves. Walls climb the natural formations, enclosing courtyards and gates that overlook the plain below. For centuries, the site was both refuge and stronghold, protected as much by nature as by stone. In the heart of the Rhodope Mountains lies Smolyan, a town stretched along a narrow valley between steep ridges. The streets climb in terraces along the slopes, with houses scattered among pines and cliffs that rise abruptly above the roofs. The town does not spread wide, but instead follows the line of the river and the folds of the mountains. Above Smolyan, glacial lakes lie hidden in forests, their waters still and dark under the cliffs. Trails lead from the town into deep valleys and high meadows, where the mountains close in on every side. In winter, snow covers both ridges and streets, while in summer, the forests ring with the sound of streams. On a rocky peninsula along the southern Black Sea coast lies Sozopol, a town whose history stretches back to ancient Greece. The old streets wind between stone foundations and wooden houses, their upper floors built with dark beams and overhanging balconies. Fragments of walls and churches rise among the lanes, reminders of centuries when Sozopol was a thriving port known as Apollonia. The sea has always defined the town. Waves crash against the cliffs below the old quarter, while fishing boats and yachts fill the sheltered harbor on the opposite side. Along the narrow alleys, courtyards open to the sound of gulls and the smell of salt carried in from the water. From the shore, the view stretches across the Black Sea, with the tiled roofs and wooden facades of Sozopol clustered tightly above the rocks. High in the Rhodope Mountains rises Belintash, a plateau of solid rock that stretches like a giant table above the forest. Its surface is scarred with fissures, depressions, and carved basins, some believed to have been made by ancient peoples for rituals. From the edge, cliffs drop steeply into the valleys, their slopes covered in pine and oak. Legends surround the plateau. Some say it was a Thracian sanctuary, aligned with the stars. Others speak of hidden treasures and secret chambers buried within the rock. Archaeologists have found traces of ancient settlements, but the full story of Belintash remains uncertain. The views are commanding. From the plateau's rim, the ridges of the Rhodopes unfold in waves of green and stone, the mountains stretching in every direction, while the rock surface itself lies bare and silent under the sky. On a narrow peninsula stretching into the Black Sea lies Nesebar, a town layered with more than 2 millennia of history. The old streets are paved with worn stone, winding between wooden houses that lean over narrow lanes. Churches dominate the small peninsula, their brick walls patterned with arches and stone inlays. Byzantine domes rise beside medieval chapels, each one a fragment of the city's long past. Between them stands remains of fortifications with walls and gates that once defended the harbor from attack. The sea surrounds the town on three sides. Fishing boats lie moored in the shallows, and waves break against the stone foundations of churches built at the very edge of the water. From the harbor, the view stretches out to the open Black Sea, with Nesebar's towers and tiled roofs clustered tightly on the rocky shore. In the central foothills of the Balkan Mountains lies Veliko Tarnovo, a city built on steep cliffs above the Yantra River. The river bends in tight loops through the valley, carving deep meanders that encircle rocky hills. Houses rise in terraces along the slopes, their balconies hanging above the water, stacked one upon another in long lines. At the city's heart stands Sarvets, the medieval fortress that crowns a hill surrounded on three sides by the river. Stone walls and towers climb the ridge, recalling the time when Veliko Tarnovo was capital of the Second Bulgarian Empire. Nearby, the remains of churches, gates, and royal halls scatter across the slopes, their outlines standing against the sky. The city spreads beyond the fortress into modern neighborhoods, yet the landscape keeps its historic drama. In the southwest of Bulgaria rises the Massif of Rila, the highest mountain range in the Balkans and the heart of the country's largest national park. Peaks soar above 2,000 meters, with Musala reaching 2,925, the highest point on the peninsula. The summits are sharp and exposed, their slopes falling into valleys carved by glaciers and rivers. The park is a mosaic of landscapes. Dense forests of spruce, fir, and pine cover the lower ridges, broken by meadows where streams run clear and cold. Above the tree line, the terrain opens into rocky cirques, where alpine grasses cling to bare stone. Dozens of glacial lakes are scattered across the mountains, their surfaces still and dark, reflecting cliffs and clouds. Wildlife thrives in the park. Brown bears roam the forests, chamois climb the steep slopes, and eagles circle the ridges. Hidden among the valleys lie monasteries and hermitages, places where people sought solitude in the shadow of the peaks. On the plains of southern Bulgaria lies Plovdiv, a city built along the banks of the Maritsa River and over a series of hills that rise suddenly from the flatland. The 7 hills once gave the city its form, their slopes shaping neighborhoods that climb upward with cobbled lanes and stone steps. Plovdiv is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in Europe. Layers of Thracian, Roman, Byzantine, and Ottoman history remain embedded in its streets. Amphitheaters and walls stand among houses painted in bright colors from the Bulgarian Revival period. Mosques and churches rise close together, their domes and spires framed by tiled roofs and narrow alleys. From the hilltops, the view spreads across the Thracian plain, with the ridges of the Rhodope and Balkan Mountains enclosing the horizon. In the southwest of Bulgaria rises Pirin, a mountain range of sharp granite peaks and deep valleys, protected as a national park. The summits reach over 2,900 meters, with Pirin standing at 2,914, its massive dome of stone rising above the ridges around it. The peaks are bare and jagged, shaped by ice and wind, their slopes dropping steeply into cirques carved by ancient glaciers. Dozens of glacial lakes lie scattered through the valleys. Some are small, hidden among forests, while others spread wide beneath cliffs, their surfaces reflecting the surrounding peaks. Streams connect them into chains, running down into rivers that cut through the lower ridges. The park holds a rich forest belt, with pine, fir, and beech covering the slopes. Higher up, alpine meadows open among the rocks, where wildflowers grow in summer and snow lingers late into spring. Chamois move along the cliffs, and eagles circle above the ridges. On the southern Black Sea coast lies Burgas, a city set between open water and a chain of inland lakes. Unlike Varna's hills, Burgas spreads across flat ground, its streets running straight toward the harbor and the sea. The bay curves wide around the city, its horizon filled with ships and distant capes. The wetlands are Burgas's second edge. Vast lakes surround the city on 3 sides, their water shallow and fringed with reeds. These lagoons are home to herons, cormorants, and migrating flocks of storks and pelicans. Salt pans line the shores, their pools glowing white and pink under the sun. Life in the city is tied to both sea and lake. The port handles ships that carry goods along the coast and across the Black Sea, while fishermen work the sheltered waters nearby. On a narrow spit of land between the Black Sea and a salt lake lies Pomorie, a town shaped by water on both sides. The sea stretches wide to the east, while to the west the lake glows white and pink in the sun, where salt pans spread across its shallows. The old part of town holds narrow streets and wooden houses built close together, their upper floors leaning above the lanes. Fishing boats lie moored along the shore, nets drying on the sand beside the piers. The air carries the scent of salt, caught between sea breeze and lake wind. The salt pans have been worked since antiquity, and traces of Roman baths and Thracian tombs remain nearby. In the eastern Rhodope Mountains, on a rocky ridge above the valley of the Perperikon River, lies Perperikon, a vast complex carved into stone. The site spreads across a hilltop, where cliffs and terraces form the foundations of a city that was part sanctuary, part fortress, and part settlement for more than 3 millennia. The earliest traces belong to the Thracians, who cut altars and steps into the rock for rituals tied to fire and the sun. Later, the Romans and Byzantines fortified the ridge, building walls, gates, and towers that still trace the outlines of streets and plazas. In the Middle Ages, Perperikon became a powerful stronghold, its citadel rising above the lower town, with carved cisterns, churches, and halls scattered across the plateau. From the summit, the view stretches over forests and valleys, with the Rhodope ridges fading into the horizon. North of Sofia, the Iskar River cuts a deep passage through the Balkan Mountains, forming the Iskar Gorge, a winding valley more than 70 kilometers long. Sheer cliffs rise on both sides of the river, their limestone walls weathered into towers, ridges, and overhangs that dominate the horizon. Below, the river bends sharply between the slopes, carving meadows and narrow floodplains where villages and fields cluster close to the water. The gorge is a landscape of contrasts. Forests cling to the upper ridges, while rocky spires stand bare against the sky. Caves open in the cliffs, some stretching deep underground, while waterfalls plunge suddenly into the valley. Roads and railways follow the river's course, crossing bridges and tunnels as they weave between stone and water. For centuries, the gorge has been both barrier and passage, a natural divide in the Balkans, but also the main route connecting Sofia with the Danubian Plain. On the western shore of the Black Sea lies Varna, a city stretched along a wide bay where land and water meet in sharp contrast. The coast is lined with beaches and steep terraces, while inland, the city rises over hills that descend toward the harbor. Streets climb and fall across this uneven ground, opening to sudden views of the sea. The Black Sea has shaped Varna since antiquity. Ancient settlements once stood here, and ships still cross the bay, their lights marking the horizon at night. Fishing boats lie moored beside modern docks, while cargo vessels anchor offshore, connecting the port to distant coasts. The city spreads inland in layers. Broad boulevards carry traffic past markets, apartments, and industrial districts. Parks and gardens reach toward the waterfront, their paths shaded with linden and oak. High in the Rhodope Mountains lies Dospat Reservoir, a vast stretch of water enclosed by forested ridges. The shoreline curves in long bays and narrow inlets, with pine-covered slopes descending directly into the lake. From the surface, the water appears still and dark, mirroring the hills that rise steeply above it. The reservoir was created in the mid-20th century, but it feels like part of the mountains themselves. Villages and scattered houses dot the slopes, their gardens reaching down toward the shore. Small harbors hold fishing boats, and wooden piers stretch into the water. Hidden in the northern foothills of the Balkan Mountains lies Bozhentsi, a village preserved in the style of Bulgaria's national revival. Stone lanes wind between houses built of heavy timber and whitewashed walls, their roofs covered with wide stone slabs. The buildings cluster on the slopes of a valley, their upper floors jutting out above the streets with carved balconies and wooden shutters. The village has stood here for centuries, its form shaped by merchants and craftsmen who settled in the mountains. Churches, workshops, and small courtyards remain, each one enclosed by high stone walls. Today, the village holds the quiet of another time, with its narrow lanes leading past fountains, archways, and gardens shaded by walnut and plum trees. South of Varna, near the town of Byala, the coastline breaks into the White Cliffs, a stretch of pale limestone rising sharply above the Black Sea. The cliffs fall steeply into the waves, their faces marked with layers of rock that preserve a rare geological record. Here lies evidence of the boundary between the Cretaceous and Paleogene periods, the moment when the dinosaurs disappeared and new life began. The cliffs are rugged and exposed, their pale stone glowing in sunlight and standing in sharp contrast to the deep blue of the sea. At their base, small coves and rocky beaches open where the water meets the rock. Near the Black Sea coast, south of Primorsko, lies Beglik Tash, a plateau scattered with massive boulders of volcanic rock. The stones rise abruptly from the surrounding forest, some towering more than 10 meters high. Their surfaces are marked with carvings, channels, and cup-like depressions, cut by human hands long ago. Archaeologists believe Beglik Tash was a Thracian sanctuary, used for rituals connected to the sun, fertility, and the cycles of nature. Some stones form passages, others align with the solstices, creating patterns of light and shadow that once guided ceremonies. The place feels both natural and deliberate, a landscape shaped by geology, then reimagined by people. Hidden in a valley of the Rila Mountains stands Rila Monastery, Bulgaria's most revered religious and cultural monument. Enclosed by stone walls and surrounded by forests, the complex rises at the edge of a river, its towers and arcades framed by the peaks above. Founded in the 10th century by the hermit Ivan of Rila, the monastery has stood for more than a millennium, rebuilt and expanded after fires and invasions. Today, its vast courtyard is surrounded by 4 stories of wooden balconies and arched galleries, painted in vivid red, white, and black. At the center stands the Church of the Nativity of the Virgin, its domes covered in murals that unfold across walls and ceilings in brilliant color. West of Veliko Tarnovo, the Negovanka River has carved Emen Canyon, a narrow gorge of limestone cliffs and hidden waterfalls. The canyon stretches for several kilometers, its walls rising in vertical faces that close tightly around the river. In some places, the cliffs tower more than 90 meters, their pale stone marked with cracks and caves. A trail follows the edge of the gorge, crossing wooden bridges and leading to sheer viewpoints above the river. At the canyon's end lies Emen Canyon, a waterfall that plunges into a deep emerald pool surrounded by cliffs and forest. The gorge feels secluded, with the sound of rushing water echoing between stone walls. On Bulgaria's northern Black Sea coast, Cape Kalyakra juts 2 kilometers into the sea, a narrow headland of red cliffs rising more than 70 meters above the water. The cape's edges fall sheer into the waves, with caves and arches carved by centuries of wind and surf. From the top, the horizon stretches wide, the sea seeming endless on 3 sides. Legends cling to Kalyakra. One tells of maidens who leapt from the cliffs rather than be captured, their hair braided together as they fell into the sea. Fortifications also crown the headland, with stone walls and gates that guarded this strategic point through Thracian, Roman, and medieval times. Running across the center of Bulgaria, Stara Planina, the Balkan Mountains, forms a spine that divides the country from west to east. The ridges stretch for more than 500 kilometers, their peaks rising in long lines of forest and stone. Steep valleys cut into the range, carrying rivers down to the plains on either side. The mountains are covered with oak and beech at lower slopes, giving way to fir and pine higher up. Above the tree line, grassy ridges roll into the distance, opening to views of the Danube to the north and the Thracian plain to the south. In winter, the peaks are covered in snow, while summer turns the meadows bright with wildflowers. Stara Planina has long been a frontier. Fortresses crown its passes, guarding the routes that link the plains. Small villages lie in the valleys, their houses clustered around rivers and fields. Hidden within the range are caves, waterfalls, and cliffs, shaped over millennia. At the foot of Rhodope Mountain lies Sofia, a city spread across a broad basin in western Bulgaria. The mountain dominates the skyline, its slopes forested and often covered in snow, while the city stretches out below. Beyond Vitosha, the basin is enclosed by distant ridges, Stara Planina to the north, Liulan and Lozenska to the west and east, framing the capital in a ring of mountains. The city itself is a mixture of layers. Wide boulevards run across the basin, lined with apartment blocks, offices, and markets. Beneath them lie traces of Thracian, Roman, and medieval settlements, unearthed where new streets cut through the old foundations. Churches, mosques, and synagogues rise among modern towers, their domes and spires reminders of the city's long history. At Bulgaria's northeastern edge lies Stranja, a vast mountain range that descends toward the Black Sea and the border with Turkey. The ridges are low and rolling, covered in dense forests of oak, beech, and hornbeam that stretch unbroken for kilometers. Hidden among the trees are valleys where rivers wind slowly to the sea, their banks shaded and quiet. The park protects Europe's largest area of old-growth oak forest, home to wolves, deer, and rare birds that migrate along the Black Sea flyway. In spring, the undergrowth bursts with wildflowers, while autumn spreads a carpet of gold and rust across the hillsides. Villages lie scattered through the park, their houses built of wood and stone, with courtyards enclosed by gardens and orchards. Many preserve old traditions, with chapels, shrines, and ritual sites connected to both Christian and pre-Christian beliefs. Toward the coast, the mountains fall into cliffs and beaches, where rivers like the Velika meet the sea. High in the Pirin Mountains, at over 2,500 meters, lies Tevno-Vasilashko Lake, the largest glacial lake in the range. Its waters spread wide across a rocky cirque, enclosed by granite peaks that rise sharply on every side. The surface reflects cliffs and clouds, a still expanse broken only by wind or passing birds. The lake feels remote and austere. Boulders scatter the shoreline, and alpine grasses cling to thin soil between stones. Snow often lingers on the ridges well into summer, feeding the lake with cold streams. Nearby stands a small mountain refuge, its red roof a lone mark of shelter in the open alpine landscape. High in the Rila Mountains, at nearly 1,800 meters, Skakavitsa Waterfall plunges from a cliff into a narrow gorge. The water drops more than 70 meters in a single cascade, breaking into spray that drifts across the surrounding rocks and forest. In spring, when snowmelt feeds the river, the waterfall is at its most powerful, filling the valley with thunder and mist. The slopes around Skakavitsa are covered in spruce and fir, their branches catching droplets from the spray. In winter, the falls often freeze into vast columns of ice, turning the gorge into a frozen wall of crystal. Trails climb steeply through forest to reach the base, where the air is cool even in summer. South of Varna, in the foothills near the coast, lies Kamchia Lake, a vast reservoir formed along the Kamchia River. The water stretches in long arms between forested slopes, its surface quiet and reflective under changing skies. The surrounding ridges are low but densely wooded, enclosing the lake in a broad basin of green. The reservoir was built in the 1970s to supply the growing cities of the Black Sea coast, but it blends into the natural landscape. Pine and oak cover the hillsides, while meadows open at the water's edge. Birds circle above the shoreline, and in the still mornings, the lake lies shrouded in mist. Near the Iskar River in northern Bulgaria lies Karlukovo, a karst region of cliffs, caves, and stone arches carved into massive limestone walls. The plateau is broken by deep gorges, where vertical cliffs rise in pale gray, marked with fissures and dark cave mouths. The most famous of these is Prohodna Cave, known as the Eyes of God, where two large openings pierce the roof and cast light into the cavern below. Around it, dozens of other caves cut into the rock, their passages stretching deep underground. The cliffs themselves are dramatic, their edges overlooking the valley and the river winding below. In the eastern Rhodope Mountains, the Arda River spreads into Karjali Dam, a vast reservoir enclosed by steep ridges. The water winds between rocky slopes and long inlets and sharp bends, its surface reflecting cliffs that rise directly from the shore. The dam itself stands more than 100 meters high, a massive wall of concrete holding back the river. Around the lake, the land is rugged and dramatic. Forested hills descend into the water, while sandstone cliffs form narrow peninsulas that stretch far into the reservoir. Villages lie scattered on the ridges, their white houses and red roofs visible above the tree line. North of Cape Kaliakra lies Yailata, a plateau of limestone cliffs that drop steeply into the Black Sea. The headland is wild and open, its grassy surface ending abruptly in vertical walls that stand more than 50 meters above the waves. Caves cut into the cliffs, some formed by nature, others shaped into dwellings and tombs thousands of years ago. Archaeological remains scatter the plateau. Thracian sanctuaries, early Byzantine fortifications, and cave monasteries lie close together, their outlines blending with the rock. The most striking are the cave dwellings, carved directly into the limestone, where entrances open like dark windows above the sea. From the cliff edge, the view runs across the endless horizon. At the northern foot of the Pirin Mountains lies Bansko, a town framed by sharp alpine peaks that rise suddenly above the plain. The streets spread across the valley floor, their stone lanes winding between houses built in the style of the Bulgarian Revival. Heavy gates open into courtyards, and tall chimneys rise above timber-framed upper floors. The mountains dominate the horizon. Trails climb from the town into forests of pine and fir, leading toward ridges where glacial lakes lie hidden between cliffs. In winter, snow covers both slopes and rooftops, binding the town to the peaks above. High in the central Rhodope Mountains lies Chudnite Mostove, the wonderful bridges, a set of massive natural stone arches spanning a forested valley. The largest arch rises nearly 40 meters high, its vaulted opening wide enough to swallow a building. Beneath it, a stream flows into darkness, echoing under the stone before re-emerging lower down the slope. The bridges were formed by the collapse of a cave, leaving only the strongest sections of marble standing. Over time, water and frost carved the openings into smooth, graceful spans. The arches stretch across the gorge like ancient ruins, yet they are entirely natural. Stretching across northern Bulgaria, the Danubian Plain runs from the foothills of the Balkan Mountains to the wide river that marks the border with Romania. The land is open and rolling, a sweep of fields and low ridges shaped by centuries of wind and water. In spring and summer, the plain is green and fertile, with crops covering the horizon in long, even lines. The Danube itself is the defining edge. Wide and slow, it bends across the border in sweeping curves, carrying barges and ferries between the two countries. Its banks hold wetlands, backwaters, and small islands where herons, storks, and pelicans gather. Fishing villages cluster along the shore, their boats moored among reeds. At the edge of the Pirin Mountains lies Melnik, a town pressed into a valley of sandstone cliffs. The hills around it rise in strange pyramids and ridges, their shapes carved by erosion into sharp points and narrow spires. The light shifts across the cliffs through the day, turning them from white to gold and red. The town itself is small, its streets lined with houses built in the style of the Bulgarian Revival. Stone foundations rise into timber-framed upper floors, their windows looking over courtyards and terraced vineyards. Some of the houses are vast mansions, reminders of the merchants who once thrived here. Vineyards surround the town, climbing the sandy slopes and producing wines that have been famed for centuries. In the foothills of the Balkan Mountains lies Lovech, a town built along the Osam River. The river cuts through the valley in wide bends, crossed by stone embankments and the famous covered bridge, a wooden structure lined with shops that arches fully across the water. The old quarter climbs the cliffs above the river. Narrow lanes wind upward between houses built from stone foundations and timber-framed upper floors, their roofs tiled in red. From the heights stands Hisaria Fortress, its walls overlooking both town and valley, a reminder of centuries when Lovech was a strategic stronghold. Gardens and courtyards spread along the slopes, shaded by fruit trees and enclosed with stone walls. From above, the view shows the Osam bending through the town, its waters dividing the modern city from the revival houses that cling to the ridges. In the western Rhodope Mountains lies Batak Reservoir, a vast stretch of water set among ridges and pine forests. The shoreline bends in long arms and narrow inlets, its surface shifting with wind and light. Forested slopes descend directly into the water, while meadows and clearings open at the edges. The reservoir was created in the mid-20th century, flooding valleys around the historic town of Batak. Today, the lake supplies power and water, but it has also become a place of quiet landscapes. Fishing boats move across its surface, and villages lie scattered on the ridges above, their houses looking down toward the water. Forests and valleys, with the Rhodope ridges fading into the horizon. Bulgaria is dramatic, ancient, and full of wonder. Where mountain peaks tower over hidden valleys, Thracian sanctuaries lie carved in stone, and medieval fortresses watch above rivers and plains. If this glimpse sparked your curiosity, hit subscribe. More countries await right here on the channel.